In this video, we are going to set up a physics layer for our hitbox, which is basically our sword. We are going to isolate it and put it on its own layer so that when we swing, we don't hit ourselves. Now to do that, what we need to do is we need to basically say on our object here, we're going to select our player, go down to the hitbox. You'll see here that the current layer is default. Very similar to how we handled the grounded layer where we created the ground layer, we're going to create another layer for our sword. Now that we've done that, you can select our hitbox and you can change the layer to sword. What we need to do now is we need to tell Unity to ignore the sword layer on our player. To do that, we have to go to Edit, Project Settings, go to Physics 2D. And in here, you'll see our layers. On the sword layer, we can tell it to ignore the player. Now our player is assigned to the default layer. The problem here is that so are all of our enemies and everything else in our game. If we were to modify that, we would have to break out everything into their own individual layers. So we don't want to do that, at least not now. So what we're going to do is we're going to create another layer for our player. We're going to put our player on his own layer. That way we can say to the sword, ignore the player layer, but the player can interact with everything else. So to do that, we're going to create a new layer, add layer, and let's call it player on layer 10. Once we've done that, select your player, change the layer to player, and you can go ahead and change the children. Once we've done that, you're going to need to reselect the hitbox and reassign the layer to sword. Now that we have a player in a sword layer, we can then go to Edit, Project Settings, Physics 2D, and we can tell the player to ignore the sword layer. So here on our player, go ahead and check the sword layer. Make sure it's unchecked. Save your scene. Let's run the game. And we should notice that now our sword will not interact with our player. If I swing, you'll see here, there's no logs. So now we're not hitting the player because it's ignoring that layer. Now we're ready to continue on.